So, good evening, everybody. Let's start with our motivation. And seeing it that it's Thanksgiving, especially have thanks for having a precious human life with all the qualities necessary to practice the Dharma. And we should have this kind of appreciation not only today on Thanksgiving, but every day. And on the basis of having that appreciation and gratitude towards just the basic condition of our life, then to have a strong determination to make it meaningful. And the best way to make it meaningful is to be able to benefit others and ourselves. And the best way to benefit is not simply temporarily with the necessities of this life, but to be able to lead others on the path to full awakening, whereby they can attain the state of non-abiding nirvana and be forever free from all the dukkha of cyclic existence. So seeing as that's the best way to be of benefit, then we need to try and make ourselves into somebody who is able to benefit others in that way. And in order to lead others on the path, we first have to actualize that path ourselves. And so we generate that aspiration for full awakening by completing the path. And we do this for the benefit of all sentient beings, ourselves and all others as well. And since accomplishing that path doesn't come all at once, it comes step by step, then what we're doing tonight is creating some of the causes, some of the many, many causes for full awakening. And so therefore to really try and listen and think about the teachings as much as we can. Yes. Also, the striker isn't in good shape. Okay. So, we've been doing Aryadeva's 400 verses, and last week we completed chapter 13. Yeah, so we've completed 325 of those verses. How long have we been going on this text?
Well, a year and a half.
A year and a half? Okay, so we're getting there. Okay, so we're going to continue on today. Chapter 14 is about refuting extreme conceptions. Okay, so these last several chapters have really been about refuting all of our wrong ideas, wrong kind of grasping, misapprehension of how persons, including ourselves, and all other phenomena, including our body and mind, how all these things exist. Okay, so verse 326. This is an interesting chapter. Okay. Verse 326 says, if a thing did not depend on anything else at all, it would be self-established, but such a thing exists nowhere. So I think some of you may understand that verse. I mean, at least a A little bit? Okay. So this verse is about proving that functional phenomena are empty of inherent existence. Okay, so self-establishment, inherent existence, true existence, all these things from the Prasangika Madhyamaka view are synonymous. So our old friend Joe Blow starts out this chapter asking the question. He says, if like a ring made by a firebrand, you know, when you have like a twinkler, you remember when you were little kids? Spark. No, they're called twinklers too.
In California. Oh.
Yes, in California. Yes. What do you call them in sparklers? Yeah, I guess you could call them. Okay, but you know how when you spin them around, it's actually just one point, but it gives the appearance of a whole circle. Okay, it's like the propeller of a plane. It spins fast and it gives the appearance of a circle. Yeah, when I was a little girl, one time I was on a plane like that, and I said, Mom, the propellers stopped. And she said, no, it's just spinning so fast, you can't see it. I said, no, Mom, it stopped. And then the captain came on the plane, said, we are making an emergency landing. Yeah, so, yeah, you have to be able to distinguish between a propeller that's going too fast, you can't see it, and one that has stopped, okay? So Joe Blow says, if like a ring made by a firebrand, you know, by a twinkler, samsara is a dependent arising and doesn't exist inherently, then what does exist inherently? So he thinks, you know, if that doesn't exist inherently, because it arises dependently, because when you take a sparkler or a twinkler and you know, twirl it around, it gives that appearance, and even though that appearance is false, the appearance arose as a dependent arising dependent on the sparkler and, you know, everything else. Okay, so he's saying, okay, that's a dependent arising, but, and so it's dependent, but then what really is inherently existent? Okay, so Aryadeva says, a mode of existence not merely posited by nominal conventions is called dependent existence, existing by your own entity, existing by its own characteristics, self-existence, inherent existence, true existence, existing from its own side, objective existence, substantial existence. For the Prasangikas, all these terms are the same, okay, have the same meaning. Okay, so what does that mean? It's a mode of existence that is not merely positive by conventions. Okay? So what he's saying is that the only way things exist is dependently, especially that they're deposited they're posited by a conventional consciousness. Okay, they're just nominally posited, given a name, and you know, that we all agree on, and that's the only way that they really exist. Yeah. Now, when we hear this, our mind goes, "Wait a minute! Look, I agree with Joe Blow. Yeah, sure, the twinkler." You know, is giving the appearance of a circle, it's a dependent arising, but I cannot accept that things exist only on the basis of nominal conventions. No, everything's got to have some essence that makes it what it is, especially me. Because I feel, when I just sit here, I am me, and don't just tell me I exist because of the label me. That's rubbish. I have my own personality. my own likes and dislikes. I am a distinct individual. Yeah. Right? Isn't that how we feel? Yeah. I'm this distinct individual, and I've got to protect myself and make myself happy, and, you know, I am not merely designated. Forget it. Well, Aryadeva doesn't agree with us. Yeah. So he says anything that existed in this way, with its own true essence, would not rely on any other factors whatsoever. Because something that has its own independent entity or exists objectively, yeah, then cannot depend on any other thing. So it can't depend on being merely labeled by conventions, but it also can't depend on causes and conditions, and it can't depend on parts. Yeah, and it can't depend on being what it is in relationship to other things. Because as soon as you take away this factor of being merely designated, yeah, then you're making it independent in every other way as well. Okay, so this is special for the Prasangikas, because the lower tenet systems say, yeah, we agree with Joe Blow, things don't exist just by mere dependence. Yeah, they have their own essence, but they do depend on causes and conditions. And some of them will say, yeah, and they do depend on parts too. So, you know, we believe what Joe Blow believes. But Aryadeva says, no, as soon as you know, say that they're independent of, you know, being designated, you know, that they have some independent existence that is not in any way related to our mind, then they also have to be independent of causes and conditions and independent of parts. Okay? Because anything that doesn't exist dependent on the mind, on being merely designated by the mind, you know, is going to have to be some kind of, you know, permanent independent thing that has its own essence. And as soon as something has its own essence, then it has no need for causes and conditions. And it has no need for parts. And it has no need to exist independent on anything else either. Okay? So, yeah, and so first of all, this thing that you know, is independent of nominal conventions, okay? It would have to not rely on any other factors whatsoever. And second of all, it would be findable under ultimate analysis. In other words, when we search, you know, when we ask ourselves, what really is this thing? Or to put it in other language, what does this word, like cup, really refer to? You know, what really is the cup, or what does the word cup really refer to? It's the same process of analysis. You've got to be able to find something. Yeah, something that you can isolate, draw a line around, and say, this is it. Okay? However, yeah, no phenomena can exist in this way. So in actual fact, there's no focus. There's no focal point for grasping at inherent existence, because there's nothing we can isolate and say, this is it. Okay? So, you know, if just some simple analysis, if you look at the cup, you know, it looks like it is a cup here. We all agree on that. But what actually does the word cup refer to? Does it refer to this? Does it refer to the handle? Does it refer to the bottom of the cup? To the sides of the cup? You know, what really does the word cup refer to? Yeah? Same thing when we you know, take somebody's name, like a little mudita. Oh, who is sitting on Maitri's chair. That's why Maitri was unhappy, because Pipsqueak is on her chair. Okay, so we say mudita. What does the word mudita actually refer to? Well, okay, that cat. Well, what do you mean by that cat? What is that cat? Yeah, is it the fur? Yeah, is it the ears? Is it the paws? Yeah, is it her purring sound? Is it her stomach? Yeah, is it her mind? What actually is that cat? Yeah, we can't isolate anything, can we? And the same thing goes when we use our own name. Yeah, use your own name, you know, or just say, who am I, really? Yeah, and try and find out what the word I really refers to. Okay, so, you know, Aryadeva, Chandrakirti, and Nagarjuna are saying you can't isolate anything when you search for it. Okay? Okay. Then, 327. Yeah. So there's a little quotation. The form is a pot. They are not one. The pot that has form is not separate. The pot does not have form, nor does the form have a pot. Okay, so in the beginning in the Pali Sutras, you know, and then going through into Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and all, there's this way of you try and analyze what something could possibly be. Okay, and so here. This verse is about refuting a truly existent composite by examining the four possibilities. So here the possibilities, yeah, is we're taking the pot and we're comparing it to one of its characteristics, the visual form. So visual form refers to the color and shape of something. Okay, so, yeah, the first one, if the composite thing that's made up of different parts, if the composite known as a pot, still don't have a pot, existed by its own entity, are the visible form, in other words, the color and shape, what you see when you see the pot, are they and what you see when you see the pot, is that and the pot, inherently one or inherently different? Because if the pot existed inherently, it should be either, you should be able to find it under ultimate analysis, and it would have to be inherently one, meaning it would have to be either exactly one and the same in every respect with the visible form, the color and shape, or it would have to be something totally separate, so totally distinct from the color and shape. Okay, so we're going to examine four possibilities here. Yeah, so the visible form, and the pot in the statement. The form is a pot. Okay, aren't inherently one. Otherwise, there would be a pot wherever there was visible form. So if visible form, if color and shape, if you say this cup is its color and shape, or is color and shape, yeah, and if they were inherently one, the cup and its color and shape, yeah, then wherever there is color and shape, there should be a cup. Because they're inseparably one. Okay? So that doesn't make any sense. Okay? In addition, if the cup were the color and shape inherently, you know, that quality of being the color and shape, then the cup also couldn't have other qualities like hardness or breakability or impermanence, because as soon as it is inherently one with one thing, it is that thing in all respects, and it can't be anything else. Okay, but clearly that's not the case, because when we talk about the cup has color and shape. It has a sound when you hit it. It has hardness. It has a certain smell. It has a certain taste. You know. Okay, so it's not just the visible form. Yeah, but it's interesting because our eye consciousness is probably our strongest of the senses in some ways. In other ways, other ones are stronger. But you know, but as soon as we see something, so often we think that that object is whatever we see. Actually, we're only seeing color and shape. Yeah. But we look at that and we say, oh, that's the medicine Buddha. Yeah, we're just seeing color and shape. But we say, that's the medicine Buddha. Okay, so if the medicine Buddha were inherently, you know, blue, then whenever you saw blue, you should see the medicine Buddha. And also, the medicine Buddha wouldn't have any other colors or any other qualities. It would be synonymous with the color blue. That's not the case at all. Okay? Then, second alternative. If you think a pot which is distinct from visible form possesses form, okay, the way a person possesses a cow. In other words, if we think that this cup, yeah, which is, we say, okay, it's not visible form. Yeah, you convinced me. But so it's independent from visible form, but it possesses visible form. This cup has color and shape. And if we say it has color and shape, the same way a person has a cow, okay? A cow is something totally different than a person, okay? The way a person has their ear and the way they have a cow are different, isn't it? Because the ear is part of their body, is part of the basis of designation for the person. The cow isn't. Okay, so if you think that this thing has, you know, color and shape, it's distinct from visible form, but it has color and shape, the same way somebody possesses a cow, okay, then the pot could be apprehended independent of the color and shape, because you can apprehend a person independent of the cow that they possess. So then we should be able to to apprehend the cup independent of apprehending its color and shape. Can you do that? No. Okay. Okay, we would be able to see the pot without seeing its color and shape. Good luck. Okay, so that's not the case. So a pot that has form isn't inherently separate or different from the form. So that's the second thing. Yeah. Then the third one, the pot doesn't have form that is something separate that depends on it. So this one and the fourth one, we're talking about dependence, okay? So the pot, or the cup, okay, doesn't have color and shape that is something separate from it, and yet still depends on it. Okay? Because it can't be separate from it and still depend on it. Okay? So, so if it did, then the pot and the color and shape, again, could be apprehended separately. Or when we talk about dependence in this way, yeah, the pot possessing color and shape, we have the feeling like first there's the pot, and then there's the color and shape that depends on the pot. Okay, so when Jeffrey talks about in one of his books, he says it's kind of like if we see an object, it's like smearing mayonnaise on top of it that holds it all together as that object. Okay, so if you have color and shape and hardness and smell and taste in a certain combination, then the word cup kind of holds all those different qualities and makes them into an object. Okay? Yeah. So sometimes we feel like that. Like first there's the whole composite object, and then there's the things that feel, you know, that are like that. Oh no, wait a minute. I'm doing it backwards here. Whoops. Oh no, I'm not. First there's the pot, and then there's the color and shape. Okay. So. Oh yes, there's the pot, and it has these and these and these qualities that consist of it. Yeah, but the pot is the thing that holds it together. Or the other thing, the fourth one, is the visible form doesn't have a pot that's dependent on it, like a dish and its contents. Okay, so a dish is like visible form, and its contents are the pot. Or I guess you could reverse it and say the dish is like the pot, and the contents are, and then you would be reversing 3 and 4. Okay, but here, in 3, the pot doesn't have a form that is separate, that depends on it. So first you have the pot, then you have the things depending on it. Then the fourth one is first you have the things that are depending on it, all the parts of or characteristics of the pot, and then you have the pot that holds it together. Yeah, the example, the way I explained it the first way, I didn't do it very clearly. First way is, know these examples. These examples and the wording don't match in my mind. Anyway, whichever one is which, there's 2 ways of looking at something, yeah? You have a bunch of trees, and then you say forest, and forest holds the trees together to make an object. Okay. Or first you have the forest, and then you have the trees that consist of it. Okay, so those are 2 different ways of phenomena depending on each other. Yeah, first you have the composite, and then you see all the parts of it. The other one is first you see all the parts, and then you have the mayonnaise that covers it and makes it all stick together. Okay, so I just explained those backwards, I think. Because first, if you have the pot first, then it's the parts that are depending on the pot. Yeah? If you have the parts first, then it's the pot depending on the parts. Okay. Anyway, the parts and the whole can't exist in either of those ways. Okay? Are you with me on that one? Can you understand that?
MC Escher.
Huh?
Does that work for like the M.C. Escher pictures, that idea?
No, here we're talking about the relationship between a composite and its components. Yeah. With Escher's pictures, we're talking about more the way we can apprehend things in different ways, depending on what details we pick out. Okay? So, what we're getting at is, on a conventional level, when we're not analyzing, we can say the pot has color and shape, and everybody understands what we mean. Okay? But if we analyze the relationship between the pot and the color and shape, or the pot and its hardness, its earth element, yeah. If we try and analyze these relationships, and then the pot has to be either inherently one and the same, or totally separate from its components. And when we analyze it, we see that the pot isn't either. Okay, that's the main point here. Okay, are you with me? Do you get that? Okay, but it's interesting, you can go back and forth between this thing of, sometimes, I will usually wind up doing it with trees when I'm on retreat, because you look at your retreat cabin, there's usually a tree. So sometimes you focus on all the branches, and you see branches, yeah, and then you see branches, and then you say tree, and then tree comes into focus. Other times you focus on the tree, and then you say, branches and trunk and flowers, and then that comes into focus. I think that's what you were referring to about the Escher painting, yeah? But it's, what's the relationship between that composite, the tree, and the component, the leaves and branches and trunk and flowers and things like that? Okay. The same question, what is the relationship between me and my body and mind? What is the relationship between me and my feelings? Yeah. Am I my emotions? Yeah. If I am my emotions, then I'm only my emotions. And then when I said I'm walking, it would mean my emotions are walking. Okay? So if I'm any of those specific aggregates, or any part of me, yeah, which I would have to be if I was inherently existent, then all the other characteristics couldn't pertain to me at all. Yeah. And if, I was inherently separate from the body and mind and all the different components that make me up, then I could be here and my body and mind could be somewhere else. Yeah. And sometimes you feel like that on a spaced out day, I'm gone somewhere. No, I'm joking. It's not really like that, but, but, you can't have the person somewhere without having their body and mind somewhere. Okay? So in that way, we show that things can't be inherently existent, because if they were, they should be findable as inherently one or inherently separate. Okay? And you can't find them either way. And those two cases of dependence of, the trees depending on the forest and the forest depending on the trees, those are both cases, well, you can see them either way, as either are they inherently one or are they inherently separate. Usually you say they're different. They're inherently different. Okay, then 328, right? Since the two are seen to have dissimilar characteristics, if the pot is separate from existence, why would existence not also be separate from the pot? So this is refuting characteristics, and it's actually refuting a belief that the Vaisheshikas, a non-Buddhist school, hold. We encountered them in the last chapter, remember? They're the ones that hold these generalities that are separate from things. So I can't say again, I don't understand the Vaisheshika's view, yeah? But what they're saying essentially is that though the pot and its visual form aren't different substantial entities, but existence, just the existence of something, and the pot are different substantial entities. Okay? So the pot is a substantial entity, and it is said to exist through its connection with the great generality called existence, which is something separate from it. So it's having some idea of this, you know, generality of existence that is different from all the things that are existent. Okay? But Aryadeva says, existence and the pot have dissimilar characteristics of a generality and a specific. Remember, we went over those with Jeffrey? It isn't possible for the pot to be a substantial entity that is separate from existence. Because if existence, you know, just the quality of existing, and the pot were two separate, unrelated qualities, okay, then existence would be something totally separate from the pot, in which case the pot would not be existent. Okay? If they're totally separate. Yeah, 329. If one is not accepted as the pot is also not one. Moreover, possession is not reciprocal. Therefore, also it is not one. Okay, so this is refuting the substantial entity as a basis for distinct attributes. Okay, so here comes Joe Blow again. Joe Blow again says, the substantial entity, the pot, the cup, exists because it acts as a basis for attributes such as being one, being two, you know, being hard, being soft, being pink, you know, whatever it is. It's the basis for attributes. And these attributes are something distinct from it. Okay? So this is kind of like what we were examining. Before we were examining the relationship between the pot and the color and shape. Now we're going to examine the relationship between the pot and the quality of being one. Yeah, being one thing. Okay? Remember Jeffrey had us do the exercise of, is this one or is it plural? Yeah, so it's kind of like that. Okay? So the attribute is one, and the substantial entity that we're referring to here is the cup. Okay? So what's the relationship between these two? The object and an attribute of the object. Yeah? So one and pot are different words, and they have different meanings. So they can't be the same, can they? Okay, so if being one, or if the number one is not the pot, then the pot also is not one. Okay? Yeah, so it can't just be one. So then you couldn't say, you know, on a nominal way we can say the pot is one thing. But in terms of inherent existence, you can't say it's one thing. Because then the attribute of one and the pot would have to be identical. Okay? I should change everything from pot to cup because I never have a pot and I always have a cup and I mix the words up when I'm teaching. Okay? But the term and the thought one, okay, so thus the term and the thought one do not validly apply to the cup. Okay? Because they, you know, to validly apply in the system of inherent existence, they would have to be the same. Okay? So for one, the quality of being one thing, to inherently apply to the cup, they would have to be the same thing, and they aren't. Okay, so the pot is not inherently one thing in the same way as it's not inherently its color and shape. Okay? Then Joe Blow says, okay, the pot is one by virtue of possessing the attribute one, but one is not the pot. So, you know, before he said, you know, pot and being one are the same thing. So we refuted that. Now he's saying, okay, you know, they're different. One is not the pot, but the pot is one thing because it possesses the attribute of being one. Okay? So Aryadeva says, but possession occurs between two similar things, like a consciousness and the mental factors that accompany it. Yeah, they have these 5 factors in common. I won't confuse you now by going into them. But, you know, a primary mind and its its accompanying mental factors have 5 things in common. They have the same shape, the same focal object, the same appearing object. They happen at the same time. Okay, so they're similar things. That's how you can talk about possession. But being one and cup are 2 dissimilar things. Okay? So you can't say that the pot is one by virtue of possessing the attribute pot. You can say that conventionally, but not inherently. Okay? So also there's no reciprocal possession between pot and one, because pot possesses one, pot possesses the attribute of being one thing, but one thing, one, does not possess the pot. It doesn't own the pot, yeah? So being one thing doesn't mean that it is a pot. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the pot is also not one because it's a separate entity from one. Because if they were the same entity, then whenever you said pot, it would mean one, because they would have to be inherently the same. Or whenever you said one, it would mean pot. Okay, so both of those don't work. Okay, and also if the pot were one, the pot could not have different attributes because that would make it more than one. Okay? So it's interesting, you know, to just sit down sometime and just look at a cup and, you know, and really ask yourself, you know, because you look at it and like, this is one thing. Yeah, I'm holding one thing in my hand. But then you go like that. And it's, well, no, maybe it's 2 things I'm holding in my hand. So is it inherently one, or is it one thing, or is it 2 things? And even if I put the thing on here, if I look at it, it could be 3 things, because it could be this, and this, and this. And if I thought of all the different molecules in it, it could probably be 1 billion things. So is it one thing, or is it 1 billion things? Yeah? Is it color and shape, or is it hardness, or is it I don't know what kind of taste the cup has, what kind of smell it has, you know. Okay, so is it all these attributes or not? Okay, 330. If the form is the size of the substance, why is the form not large? Okay, if the opponent were not different, scriptural sources could be cited. Okay, so I think he's talking again to the Vaisheshikas or somebody else. So here's the inconsistency with the assertion that one attribute cannot rely on another attribute. Okay, so visible form, color and shape is an attribute of the pot. Okay, so is being large. Being large is an attribute of the pot. Okay, so the other person's contention that attributes qualify substantial entities, yeah, but that one attribute does not qualify another, is contradictory. So somehow, this other party is saying that attributes qualify, all the different attributes qualify the cup, but none of the attributes qualify one another. Okay. And Aryadeva says if you say that, that's contradictory. Now we have to figure out why he says that. If the size of the substantial entity, the pot, and the size of its visual form were the same, then why is the attribute form, visible form, not large just as the substantial entity pot is large? Okay, so if let's see if I can put this in words. I think I get what it's saying. This is very tough stuff. Yeah? So you have two characteristics, yeah? The color and shape, yeah? And you have the size. Yeah. So if the size of the pot and the size of its visible form were the same, okay, then why is the attribute of visible form not large just as the substantial entity, the pot, is large? So it's kind of saying if you have many attributes of the cup and they all are the cup, then all these attributes should also be each other.
You conflate.
Yeah, that then large would also be the same thing as pink. Yeah, because both of them are the cup. Okay? But since the color isn't large, and the color and the pot must be different entities. Okay? Yeah, so the basic thing is saying to the opponent, you must accept that the form has a separate attribute called large. And because the attribute large and the attribute of the color and shape both apply to the cup, but you can't say that that large is pink and you can't say pink is large. Okay, whereas if they were all, if the if the cup were inherently the same as its attributes, then you should be able to say all of that. I think that's what this means. Okay, and then the last two lines, this other school, you know, cites its own scriptural series, its own scriptures. And Aryadeva says, Yeah, but you can't do that, because if you were talking to somebody who was from your own school, you could cite your own text to, you know, combat their argument. But here you can't do it because we're rejecting your basic tenets to start with. Okay, so I think this must have something to do with the Vaisheshika view. Okay, then 331. By virtue of its characteristic, the characterized does not exist. Such a thing has no existence as something different from number and so forth. Okay, so here this verse is about refuting that which is characterized. So that would be the pot or the cup, and then its characteristics or its attribute would be color and shape or number or large or, you know. Okay, so here we're involved in examining the relationship between an object and its color and shape. Okay? So we always start out these things, you know, analyzing external things because it's some maybe easier way for us to get an idea of what they're trying to say. But we may do it and say, well, yeah, but so what? Yeah, but then if you start saying, you know, what's the relationship between me and my attributes? Yeah, because, okay, if one of my attributes is being a woman, yeah, am I inherently a woman? Is woman inherently me? You know, what's the relationship between these attributes? Or not between the whole and the attribute. Because sometimes you get into this thing like, I am American, or I am male, I am female. Yeah, or I am this socioeconomic class, or I am this level of intelligence, or I am this religion, or, you know. So we identify with an attribute, and we say, I am that, as if we were union oneness with that thing. That is exactly who we are, is that attribute. Yeah? We're really fixated on it. I mean, this is how people start fighting wars. They identify with an attribute and latch onto it. And this is who I am. Yeah, and somebody else is a different thing, and I am inherently this attribute, and you are inherently this other one, and therefore, you know, I have to kill you because we're different, and you're threatening me because you're threatening my identity, of, you know. So the mind is like saying, I am whatever my characteristic or attribute is. Okay, are we? Yeah, we aren't. But we can look so often in our life at how we create identities out of attributes. You know, and then hang on to this. Okay, so Joe Blow says, even if distinct attributes like separateness are refuted, the pot which they characterize is not refuted, so thus it does exist by its own entity. So Joe Blow is saying, if distinct attributes like color and shape or hardness or what are, you know, if we're refuting that these things are separate, the pot of which, the pot that they characterize, the cup that they characterize, is not refuted. We still have a cup. Even if the color and shape and texture and hardness and all this were different entities, even if they were not one nature with the cup, still the cup is there and it exists by its own entity, right? Yeah? So, but then you think about that, is that true? Yeah. So even if we say, okay, or you know, you take away all these attributes. So, okay, you know, the quality of being pink and the quality of being hard and the quality of having a top or whatever it is. All these are not inherently what the cup is. But still, there's a cup there. And, you know, this cup is not being refuted, and so it must exist from its own side. Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? But ask yourself again, is that true? Can that work? If you took away all the attributes of a cup, how could you identify the cup being there? Yeah, we only identify there being a cup by apprehending the attributes. We don't, you know, apprehend some inherent nature that's the cup or something that is the cup. We only know the cup because of different attributes it has. Okay, so if we look at that, how do we feel about ourselves? I am me. Yeah? So, okay, all these attributes. You know, first we had it, I am my attributes. You know, I am a woman, I am an American, I am this, I am that. Therefore, I got to be careful about all you people who are different than me, okay? Then, okay, so we refute that. No, you're not really inherently any of those. So then I go to the other extreme and I say, okay, I'm not any of those things. So take away the quality of being a woman and an American and being 5'4" and all this other stuff. Still, there's me. The essence of me. I am me. Yeah? It feels right, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah? Kind of like, okay, I can die and this whole body, you know, this kind of thing, this is going to disappear. But I'm still there. And now, oh, I'm free of this body, which is such a hassle, but I'm still me. And me is going to be peaceful and go on to the next life. That's the way we feel, isn't it? Like we could take away all of our qualities, all of our parts, all of our attributes, and there's me, that essential me. If you took away all of your attributes, could you identify yourself? Could anybody identify you? You know, if we took, oh, now Maitri's in the chair. So if we took away all Maitri's attributes, we took away gray and white and, you know, purring, sometimes hissing, mostly purring, yeah. And, you know, we took away all of her parts, her stomach and her ears and everything. Can we identify Maitri? No, there'd be no way at all.
But maybe the essence is there, we just can't see it.
So maybe the essence is there, but we can't see it. Then how are you going to, how do you know the essence is there if you can't see any of the attributes? If you can't see it, or you can't know it by any means?
But what you were saying earlier, that exists and what is alive, like, could it be?
Yeah. So, but then you're saying the life force.
Yeah.
The life force is the person. Well, then is the life force something separate, or is the life force what she is? If she is the life force, then the life force purrs. And then the life.
We would all purr.
Yeah, right, because we all have life force, so we would all purr. Okay. Okay. So if you, so Aryadeva says, if you say that existence and so forth have the characteristic of accompanying things, while pot has the opposite characteristic, in other words, it isn't accompanied by characteristics such as existence, then by virtue of this opposite characteristic, the pot it characterizes doesn't exist anywhere. Okay? So if if you say that the pot and the characteristic of existing were two separate things, then you couldn't say the pot exists, and the pot wouldn't exist anywhere by its own entity. Okay? So if the quality of existence accompanies the pot, but the pot does not have this characteristic, then the pot doesn't exist because it doesn't have existence. Okay, so something different from the numbers 1, 2, etc., has no existence as a pot existing from its own side. Yeah, because the pot wouldn't be one pot or two pots, and because the pot wouldn't even have the characteristic of being countable, because being one or being two or whatever it is something totally separate from the pot. Okay, so the point we're getting at here is an object does not exist by its own entity, or exist inherently, separately from its attributes and characteristics. If it did, you could identify the object without seeing any of its characteristics, such as its color or shape or how many of them there were. Or you could have the object without any of its characteristics. So you could have an object without it being large or small or any color or made of anything whatsoever. Okay? So we run into all these difficulties here. Okay, so we're going to stop here for now. Do you have questions?
Comment. Think about
Yeah.
if we spent time in school from grade 1 up looking at our attributes and seeing if we were those things, we could really simplify things on the planet. If we started,
Yeah. If we could really start from the time we were very young to see that we're not inherently any of our attributes. Yes, we are our attributes in a conventional way. Yeah, because you have to know which bathroom to go into. Yeah, and you have to know whether you go into the citizens or the foreigners line whenever you reach some kind of immigration, whether it's in your own country or another country. So conventionally those things exist. However, we are not those things. And so you're saying if we could be educated from the time we were little to not identify so much with all these qualities, then we could really relax a lot of the self-grasping and probably a lot of the self-criticism and a lot of the comparison of ourselves to others. Yeah, because what do we compare ourselves to others on the basis of? These attributes, as if I am the attributes inherently. Not that the attributes are just something labeled, to me. Yeah, would be nice, huh, if we didn't identify so much with those things. Yeah?
So you use the example of a cup or a pot, but the main reason behind studying emptiness is so you can apply it to yourself.
Right. Right.
To combat self-grasping.
Right. So we use examples like pots and chariots. Nowadays we use cars. But the whole idea is to apply it to ourselves, because the main grasping that causes us the most difficulty in life is applying it to I am, an inherently existent person. That's the main thing. So the examples are things that help us understand, but the real thing is to apply it to ourselves. Yeah. So you can see, I mean, sometimes when you look at the example, yeah, you can kind of get it. Yeah, it makes sense. But then when you apply it to yourself, something goes, no way. No way. This can't be. Because there's this feeling of, if I am not these attributes, then I'm going to totally disappear. Yeah? Like, if I am not inherently one with these things, then in fact there's no way to identify me, and then I don't exist. Yeah, because then the mind flips to, if I'm not inherently, you know, existent as this thing, then I'm totally non-existent. And that also is an extreme. So we, you know, the middle way is, yeah, you can apply these adjectives to me, but the adjectives are just conventional, and they can change all the time. Yeah? Saying I'm large or I'm small, that is depending in relationship to who else you're talking to or talking about. Yeah? Or saying I'm white or I'm black, that depends on who you're talking, who you're comparing your skin color with. You know, I'm light, I'm dark. It's, you know, those things are in comparison to somebody else. You aren't inherently one thing or the other. Or I'm sick, I'm healthy. Again, you know, those adjectives apply to us only in comparison to other people. We're not inherently sick or inherently healthy. So it's interesting to sometimes focus on these kind of things where we're trying to see the, you know, is it inherently one and the same, or is it inherently different? So focus on that side, the kind of refutation side. And then other times focus on the side of, oh, well, all these attributes that apply to me, it's all in comparison or in relationship to other things. Yeah, so yeah, these attributes apply, but they're basically just names that are designated and very loosely applied because, you know, like in the case of me, you know, am I short or am I tall? When I go to Singapore, I'm tall. Yeah, when I'm in America, I'm not tall. Okay.
When I'm in India, I'm fat.
No, not you. Never fat.
Can I ask a question back to our Chapter 9 review? It's been puzzling me. That very first question about the key feature of the Madhyamaka thing of being that dependent arising and emptiness come to the same point. Is that the same answer if you're talking from the Svatantrika Madhyamaka view? Or is that the Prasangika Madhyamaka point?
Well, it's definitely the Prasangika view. Okay? The Svatantrikas define emptiness in a different way. Yeah? So from according to how they define emptiness, yeah, because they say things do exist conventionally, inherently, yeah, then they would probably say, yeah, emptiness and dependent arising come to the same point. Yeah, and inherent existence on the conventional level is something totally separate. Yeah, things have to have that inherent existence. Otherwise they wouldn't exist at all. Okay, so all these different words, you know, I mean, we have to be aware that the different schools define these words differently. Yeah, and so just as it said that the lower schools use dependent arising to prove inherent existence, and the Prasangikas use dependent arising to prove emptiness of inherent existence. Okay, so the words, you know, because the lower schools, when they say dependent arising, I mean, if we're talking about the Vaivasikas and the Tantrikas, they mean dependent on causes and conditions. So yes, things depend on causes and conditions, so they better have their own essence. Because if they don't have their own essence, the causes and conditions couldn't produce them. Yeah? They would, you know, they would be totally non-existent. Yeah? But we see that causes and conditions produce something that exists. If it exists, it must have its own essence. Because if it's something that doesn't have its own essence, then it could be anything. Yeah? Then you could call this a giraffe. Yeah, it has to have some essence in it. Yeah, because its causes and conditions produce this. They don't produce a giraffe.
That's a very good argument.
Yeah, isn't it? So you see how, you know, well, it's good to study the different tenet systems, because in many ways they describe how we think. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions?
I was thinking tonight, when you were summing this up, that one example that's come up here was when we are our characteristics. Mm-hmm. But this is who I am.
Yeah.
When he would get stuck and couldn't change, he would say, because this is who I am, meaning I'm those characteristics.
Yeah.
I can't change.
Right, right. Yeah, we had somebody who was a resident here, and when we would, you know, point out different characteristics, then the response was, well, this is who I am. You know, don't ask me to change. I can't change. This is who I am. So I am those characteristics. As if the characteristics were not conditioned phenomena that could change. And as if, you know, who the person was is not a conditioned phenomena that can change. Mm-hmm. But we do, don't we? That's why this idea of, okay, I'm going to shed my body, but I'm still going to be me, unchanging, going on into the next life, you know, that is not going to work. Yeah, it's not going to be like that.